Montana Territory, May 1874. The first shot cracked the still morning like a tree splitting in frost, and by the time the second rang out, the wagon was already ablaze. Keziah Foster did not scream. She never did. She stood frozen beside the scorched oxen yoke, her hands shaking as the smoke twisted above the prairie grass. Her father lay crumpled near the wheel, mouth open, eyes glassed. Her stepmother was gone, dragged or run. The raiders had vanished just as fast as they came, leaving nothing but blood, burnt flour, and a silence that stretched across the earth like death's shadow. Keziah was 17. She had not spoken a word since she was 10. The settlers called her hopeless. Not because she was quiet, but because she never tried to speak, because she stared too long at things, because she held her grief like a worn shawl and never let it go. They passed her between families after her mother died, each house colder than the last. Her father remarried a woman who wanted a helper, not a daughter, and by the time they joined the wagon train west, Keziah had become a ghost that did chores. Now she was alone. Again, she knelt beside her father's body, pulled the bandana from his neck, and tied it around her wrist. Something to carry. Something to remember. She walked for hours under the rising sun until her legs ached and her shoes split at the soles. No one passed. No rider, no wagon, no mercy. It was near dusk when she saw the rider. He was on a paint horse, bare-chested save for a bone necklace, long dark hair tied back. He rode along the ridge, calm, his eyes scanning the prairie below. When he saw her, he slowed but did not speak. He did not draw his bow. He simply watched. Keziah stopped walking. She did not run. She did not raise her hands. She stood there, her dress torn at the hem, her face streaked with ash. If he meant to kill her, so be it. She had nothing left to lose. He came down the ridge slow, careful, like he did not want to scare her. When he reached her, he dismounted without a word. He was tall, lean, and his face was still with a kind of solemn knowing. Lakota, she thought. She had seen the necklaces, the paint, the way the settlers tensed around men like him, but she did not tense. He looked at the burns on her skirt, the dried blood on her sleeve. He pointed to himself and said, "Otaktay." She nodded. He pointed to her and waited. She hesitated, then picked up a stick and drew in the dirt. "AK." He crouched next to her, watching her draw. She spelled it out, Keziah. He read it aloud, careful. "Keziah." She nodded again. Her throat tightened. No one had said her name with that much care in a long time. He studied her a moment, then pointed to the horizon and said, "Come." She hesitated, but the sky was darkening and she was cold, so she followed. Otaktay led her to a small hidden camp near a narrow creek. There was a lean-to of hides strung between two bent trees, a fire already burning low. He gave her a blanket, motioned for her to sit. He cooked meat over the fire, handed her a piece without speaking. She ate with her hands. He sat near her, close enough for warmth, far enough not to crowd. He said nothing more that night. She did not sleep much. She kept waking to the sound of firewood shifting or the wind in the grass. But each time her eyes opened, she saw Otaktay sitting upright, watching the dark. Guarding. The next morning, he handed her a strip of hide and a bone awl. Showed her how to stitch the torn hem of her dress. When she fumbled, he gently turned her hand, guided her fingers. His hands were warm, steady, day after day. They moved together, quiet, steady, cautious. He never asked her to talk, never asked why she could not. He just watched her eyes when she pointed. He read her gestures like words. She learned his rhythms. He hunted in the mornings, brought back rabbit or fish. He taught her how to set traps, how to know when storm clouds were coming. She gathered wild onions, berries, roots she remembered from her mother's books. They did not speak much, but something soft grew between them in the quiet. A trust. A rhythm. One night after they'd eaten, she took a small, flat stone from her satchel, the only thing she'd saved from the wagon, and held it out to him. He turned it in his hand, saw the carved spiral her mother had etched into it when she was 5. "Your mother?" he asked. She nodded. "Gone." Another nod. His eyes met hers. "Mine, too." She reached out and touched his wrist, just a moment. But it was the first time she'd touched anyone since her father fell. He did not pull away. That night she lay beside the fire, watching the sky through the trees. Otaktay sat close, legs crossed, arms resting on his knees. "I hear you," he said softly without looking at her. Even if you do not speak, she blinked hard, her chest tightened, her fingers curled against the blanket. He turned his head, met her eyes. You are not hopeless. Something broke open in her chest. He said nothing more. He did not need to. The days passed and they moved deeper into the hills. He brought her to a hidden valley where water ran clear and the deer came close. The world was quiet there, safe. One morning she woke to find a braid of sweetgrass beside her bedroll. A gift. His way of saying he saw her. She picked it up, held it to her chest. Then she stood, walked to where he sat by the creek, and sat beside him. He looked over, waiting. She touched his hand. Then slowly she leaned in and pressed her lips to his cheek. His hand turned, closing gently over hers. He smiled, just barely. And in that moment, Keziah knew. He had heard her heart. By early June, the land had softened. Spring rains left the earth fragrant and dark, and the cottonwoods along the creek leaned heavy with new leaves. Keziah moved through the small valley with bare feet, her dress hem now mended, and her hands calloused from work she'd chosen for the first time in her life. Otaktay had begun building a shelter more permanent than the hide lean-to. He cut willow poles and peeled the bark, lashing them with sinew and rawhide. She helped him, watching closely as he fit each span with quiet precision. He did not rush. Nothing he did was hurried. Everything he touched, he did with care. That morning she carried a bundle of dry grass to pad the roof and found him trimming a beam with his knife. "You've a good eye for the shape of things," he said without looking up. She crouched beside him and tilted her head. "The way you stacked the stones by the fire pit," he continued. "Balanced, like you see how weight fits together." She brushed her hand across the dirt, drawing a rough pattern of the beam's angle and the way it would rest on the crossbar. He studied it, then nodded once. "I thought so." Later, when the sun was high and the air still, they sat by the stream and whittled. She carved an animal from a scrap of cottonwood, not a clear likeness, more suggestion than shape, but it pleased her. She held it out. Otaktay took it gently. "Looks like a badger." She gave a small smile, eyes flicking up once, then down again. "My grandfather used to say they don't back down, even when they should. Stubborn things. Brave, too." He set the carving beside him, not tucked away but kept close. That evening, as they prepared a meal of roasted roots and smoked fish, he crouched by the fire and stirred the embers thoughtfully. "You hear the drum in your chest when you look at something?" he asked. "Like your body's saying yes before your head can." She blinked, then slowly nodded. "I felt it the first time I saw you," he said. "Standing alone, not afraid to stay still." She reached for a coal with a stick, pushed it deeper into the glowing pile. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The next day, they walked farther upriver where the water ran swifter and cooler. She gathered smooth stones in her apron, sorting them by weight and color. Otaktay watched her for a while, then gestured toward a low rise where a narrow trail wound into the trees. "I want to show you something." They climbed in silence. The air was cooler beneath the firs, and the moss underfoot muffled their steps. At the top, the view widened. Hills rolled gold and green in the distance. A hawk turned slow circles high above. Otaktay knelt and brushed aside a swath of pine needles. Beneath was a flat stone carved with a single line of symbols. Lakota words etched deep. "My brother's resting place," he said. "He died in winter 5 years ago." She crouched beside him, her fingers hovering over the stone without touching. She didn't look at him, but he knew she was listening. "They said I should have gone with him," he said, "but I stayed behind. I was carving bows. I thought I had time." The wind moved in the branches above them, soft and steady. "I come here when I need to remember what matters." She reached into her pocket and drew out a strand of horsehair she'd braided that morning. Without asking, she tied it around a small branch above the stone and stepped back. He looked at her then a long moment, and his voice was quieter when he said, "You and I, we carry our dead the same way, not loud, not with noise, just carried." She placed her hand over her heart, then his. He did not flinch. When they returned to the valley, the light was low and golden. She fed the fire while he washed his hands in the stream. Afterward, she knelt beside their shelter and began arranging the stones she'd gathered that morning into a small pattern near the entrance. A circle, broken at one edge. Otaktay approached and crouched beside her. What does it mean? She pointed to the gap in the circle, then to the firelight, then to him. Understanding flickered in his eyes. Not alone anymore. She nodded once, her eyes steady on his. He reached out and for the first time touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. Slow, careful. She leaned into his palm. You don't need to speak, he said. I already know. Then she placed her hand over his and didn't let go. They stayed like that until the moon rose, the fire low, and the wind settled into quiet. By late June, the wildflowers had overtaken the valley floor. Lupine and Indian paintbrush tangled across the slope in quiet riot, and the air carried the low hum of bees. Otaktay worked with steady hands beneath the cottonwoods, shaping a bow from chokecherry wood, while Keziah rinsed a length of woven willow bark in the stream, coaxing the last of the sap free. He set the tool aside and came to stand beside her, watching the water run over her fingers. You learn fast, he said, faster than I did. She glanced up, then dipped her hands again, letting the current carry away the fine shavings. A flicker of satisfaction passed between them, quiet and whole. He crouched and reached into the water beside her, lifting a flat stone with a dark streak of iron through its center. My uncle used to say stones like this carried fire inside them. You just need to know how to call it out. She took the stone from him, turned it over in her palm, and then offered it back. He didn't take it. It's for you, he said. To keep. She tucked it into the fold of her skirt without looking away. Later that evening, they sat on the slope above the creek, sharing strips of cured meat and the last of the roasted turnips. The sky had gone soft with dusk, and the first stars blinked above the ridgeline. I've been thinking to travel north, Otaktay said. His tone held no urgency, only thought worn smooth from time. There's a Lakota camp near the Milk River. I've got kin there, a cousin who carves drums. He has a daughter close to your age. Keziah tilted her head, the question clear in her eyes. She could teach you to bead if you want. Not the traitor kind the old way, with meaning in it. Keziah nodded slowly, then pointed to herself and then to him, brow raised. I wouldn't leave you, he said. You come with me. She looked toward the fire, then back to him, hand hovering briefly over her chest. He reached out and rested his fingers over hers, anchoring. You don't owe me anything, but you have a place with me if you want it. She curled her fingers around his and held them there. That night, under the open sky, Keziah did not sleep. She lay listening to the wind in the trees, the slow breath of the man beside her, the heartbeat of a life she had not thought she would live. In the dark, her hand found his, and he folded it against his chest without a word. They began preparing the next morning. Otaktay tanned a hide for the journey, and Keziah stitched a carrying pouch from elk leather he'd traded for the previous winter. She chose the stones she wanted to bring, the ones with the most weight, the ones that felt like memory. As they packed, Otaktay unrolled a bundle of cloth from beneath his bedding. Inside was a narrow knife with a carved bone handle. He held it out. You should have something that belongs to you, not something left from someone else. She hesitated, then took it. Her thumb traced the spiral etched along the handle, different from her mother's carving but echoing the same shape. I made it the winter my brother died, he said. Didn't know who it was for until now. She nodded once, then went back to folding the last of the dried berries into a pouch. Beside her, Otaktay tightened the last strap on the pack and stood. We'll leave at first light. Before dawn, they doused the fire, scattered the ashes, and stepped into the hush of morning. The trail north would take them through the breaks and across open prairie, a journey of many days. But Keziah did not look back. Otaktay walked beside her, his steps matched to hers, the silence between them filled with something steady and known. They moved forward into the rising sun, and the path ahead opened wide, waiting. The third morning of their journey north, they reached the edge of the coulee country, where the land dipped into long folds and the butts cast slender shadows even at midday. The wind moved different there lower to the ground, quieter. Otaktay paused at the crest of a rise and scanned the valley ahead, his hand shading his eyes. There's a place we can camp near the cottonwoods, he said. Spring runs clear there even when the heat comes. Keziah adjusted the leather strap across her shoulder, nodding once before stepping down the slope beside him. Her legs ached beneath the weight of the pack, but she kept pace. They made the camp just before the light thinned to evening. The spring bubbled beneath a ring of red earth, and the cottonwoods leaned in half-circle around it like watchers. Keziah knelt to refill their canteens while Otaktay gathered wood from the fallen limbs that lay in the long grass. As the fire caught, she pulled the carving knife from her pouch and began working a piece of driftwood she'd picked up at the river bend. Her fingers moved slow, steady, shaving the edges into a long curve. Otaktay watched her across the flames. "You've got away with your hands," he said. "Even when they're quiet." She looked up, met his gaze, then held the wood toward him. He took it, turning it over once. "A feather," she nodded. He ran his thumb along the spine. "It'll carry meaning if you finish it." She tilted her head. "Feathers belong to the air," he said. "But you're shaping it from something that came through water. That's a story." He handed it back, and she studied the unfinished piece a long moment before tucking it into her bag. Later, as the sky deepened to indigo, Otaktay leaned back on his elbows and looked toward the stars. "When I was a boy, I used to think I'd never live past 20 winters," he said. "Not because of war or hunger, just because I couldn't see what came after." She turned her head toward him, her brow drawn. "I fought hard not to care too deeply about anything. If you care, you lose." "That's how I thought." He looked over at her, eyes steady. "But you changed that." She pressed her palm to the earth between them, then to her chest. "I see it in you too," he said. "You stopped moving just to survive. You're choosing where to stand now." She didn't look away. Her fingers curled once, slow, then opened again. He reached out, not hurried, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Not out of need, just because it's true." She lifted her chin, waiting. "Will you make a life with me?" he asked. "Not just walk beside me, not just share the fire. I'm asking if you'll be my wife." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out the spiral stone, the one her mother had carved. She held it out, then placed it in his palm. She closed his fingers around it and nodded once, slow and sure. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her fingers, then rested their joined hands over his heart. They stayed by the fire until the coals settled into a low glow. When they lay down that night, she curled against him without hesitation, his arm around her waist, their breath rising in time. In the morning, they would keep moving. There was still land ahead, still kin to greet and seasons to prepare for, but the road no longer stretched empty. It led toward something they would build together, stone by stone, fire by fire, with hands that knew how to stay. By mid-July, the grasslands shimmered beneath a sky that rarely clouded, and the trail north had grown rougher, winding through broken ridges and coulees where the sun reached deep, and the shade vanished by midday. Otaktay led them with an ease that came from long memory. Keziah moved just behind him, her breath steady, her back straight beneath the pack she bore without complaint. They reached the Milk River on a morning so still the surface mirrored the cottonwoods perfectly. A distant column of wood smoke curled upward, thin and certain. Otaktay stopped on a rise and scanned the land ahead. "They're there," he said. "My cousin's family. They won't ask questions you don't want to answer." Keziah nodded once, then looked out at the open plain. A hawk turned in the distance, its wings barely moving. They crossed the river that afternoon, the water knee-deep and cold. On the far bank, a boy of perhaps 10 summers waited beside a young woman with a bundle of dyed cloth tucked under one arm. Otaktay lifted his hand, and the boy grinned. "Wichasha," the woman called, then switched to English. "You're late." Otaktay smiled with his mouth only. "The trail doesn't follow the sun." The woman studied Keziah. "You brought someone." Keziah stood still, meeting the woman's gaze without flinching. "This is Keziah," Otaktay said. "She's with me." The woman nodded once, without ceremony. "I'm Winona. That's my brother's boy, Sunkawakan." Keziah acknowledged them with a small tilt of her chin. Winona didn't press for more. Instead, she turned and gestured toward a distant line of lodges near the tree line. "There's room near the west bend. Water's still clean there. You'll be left alone unless you want otherwise." They set up camp beside a low bluff where the grass grew sharp and silver. That night, Otaktay sat carving a new bow stave while Keziah sorted through the cloth bundle Winona had given her. Each piece held a pattern stitched in glass beads, red, yellow, deep green, arranged in sharp, deliberate angles. Keziah traced the lines with her finger, eyes narrowed in thought. "She taught me how to read them when I was young," Otaktay said, not looking up from his work. "Each shape's a word. Each color's a tone." Keziah arranged 3 strips beside each other, then pointed to one, then herself. "You want to learn to make your own?" he asked. She nodded. They stayed in the valley through the next 2 full moons. Keziah learned to bead under Winona's eye, her stitches uneven at first, then steadier with each row. She chose colors carefully, always in silence, but her hands spoke with growing confidence. She made a band for her waist first, then a narrow strip for Otaktay's bow grip. One evening, as they sat outside their lodge, she handed it to him without preamble. He turned it over, reading the pattern. "These shapes, they mean something," she pointed. The first, a narrow zigzag. Then her hand moved to the center, a single soft curve that broke the angle. Finally, a triangle that rose like a mountain. "Hard path," he said, nodding slowly. Then something new, then home. She didn't speak, just watched him. He tied the strip to his bow, careful not to twist it. "Then this stays with me." Always. Later that week, he took her to the open flat where the others practiced riding. He led his horse, a quiet gelding with a pale blaze, and offered her the reins. "You've walked beside me long enough," he said. "Time you rode." She hesitated, then stepped forward and took the reins in both hands. He didn't guide her. He just walked beside the horse as she mounted, then watched her find her balance. Her legs were stiff, her grip tight, but she stayed upright. She didn't look at him until the horse turned under her and circled back to where he stood. "You're not afraid," he said. She shook her head once. "Good. I don't want a wife who waits in the lodge while I ride alone." She dismounted, landing lightly, then walked to him and placed her hand against his chest. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been called many things," he said. "But I've never had someone choose me without being told to." Her hand closed into his shirt. "I'll speak to my cousin tomorrow," he said. "It's time we joined properly, not just in the eyes of the land, but before those who know us." She didn't need to nod. He saw the answer in her stillness. 3 days later, at dusk, they stood beside the river as the sun dipped behind the bluffs, casting everything in honeyed light. Otaktay wore a new shirt dyed with berries, the beadwork at the collar stitched by Winona's own hand. Keziah wore a dress of soft tanned hide, simple but shaped to her with care, her hair braided back with feathers she'd found near the water. Winona spoke a few words in Lakota, then stepped away. No one else came forward, no crowd, no songs. Just the 2 of them, the river, and the land that had carried them toward each other. Otaktay reached into his pouch and pulled out a thin strip of sinew, the same one Keziah had used to tie her carving knife. He wrapped it around her wrist and tied it once firm. Keziah took a strip of her own, a braid of her hair twined with his, and bound it around his. They didn't kiss. They just stood together, hands joined, the current whispering below. That night they shared a fire just beyond the lodges, alone. Otaktay pulled a buffalo hide over their shoulders as they sat side by side. "I never thought I'd live like this," he said. "Not because I didn't want it. I just didn't think it was given to men like me." Keziah leaned into his shoulder and closed her eyes. "You gave it to me," he said. "With every quiet thing you never asked for." She turned her face to him then, and this time she kissed him. It was not rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that came when words had long since done their work. They built their home near the West Bend, just beyond the lodge circle. Keziah tended a garden of wild onion and flax, her hands knowing now. Otaktay carved bows that traveled as far as the Missouri, his name carried by traders who never met him. They adopted a child from a neighboring family, a girl who had lost both parents in a hard winter. They gave her a name that meant held in strength. She grew beneath their care, quiet but bright-eyed, her laughter filled with the steadiness of 2 people who had once lost everything and found each other. Years passed. The world around them changed slowly, then faster, but their life held. Keziah spoke only rarely, but when she did, it was with the weight of someone who had listened long enough to know what mattered. Otaktay never needed more than that. They grew older in the valley. their hands weathered but never idle, their bond forged deeper with each season they endured together. And when they sat by the fire in the evenings, their daughter asleep just inside, Keziah would sometimes take the carved stone from her pouch, the spiral her mother had made, and place it between them. Otaktay would rest his hand over hers, and they would sit like that in the hush of their home, with nothing left to prove, only the warmth of a life fully chosen.